afternoon. We are ready to begin our meeting. Thank you for your patience, and our meeting is called to order. Let me first announce that if there's anyone, and I hope folks over there can hear me, anyone that's parked in the bus loop, you should move your vehicle immediately. The buses will be arriving shortly, and we don't want to impede that progress. So today is our first work session with our new format, and so we'll monitor the format in terms of our presentations, our discussions, and we'll debrief later and make adjustments as necessary. But I think we are moving in the right direction as a governance team, making this adjustment to our meetings, and so for that I'm excited. We have quite a bit, of course, as we perfect this model. We will not have, our presentations will not be as voluminous because they'll be in real time and covering 30 days of activity rather than 60 or 90 days. And so I expect that we'll get more efficient at this as we move forward. We're scheduled to work until 5:30, and then at 6 p.m. there is a recognition ceremony. At an appropriate time, we'll take a quick break and then get back to work here in just maybe a couple hours or so. So having said that, we'll begin with 3.03, and our first presentation this afternoon comes from Teaching and Learning. Dr. King.
Chairman Houston, members of the board, administration, and guests. The superintendent's cabinet reports and updates will consist of the following: teaching and learning first, followed by school leadership development, operations department, human resources, community engagement, finance and business, and I will close with additional remarks, brief additional remarks. With that said, I would like to defer to the teaching and learning department, facilitated by Dr. Savigny, Dr. Bailey, and Dr. Corbin.
And we would like to allow for questions or comments per subject area, okay, and not wait,
Sure.
Until the very end, okay?
Good afternoon, Dr. Houston, School Board, our team and community members. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you. This is not our presentation. Do I just... Thank you very much. Okay, this afternoon we have a lot of information to share with you, and we've got several team members who will be sharing with you. But our goals today, thank you, are to share the first quarter mock writing assessment results with you, to talk about where our students are in terms of progress in regard to meeting the mark, so to speak, for the state writing assessment in the spring. We want to share with you our first growth report in regard to Achieve 3000, give a brief refresher in regard to our common formative assessment process, and we will have the executive directors later in the afternoon sharing some of those results with you. We also want to share some preliminary results from the academic review that the State Department of Education conducted with us last week. We want to provide an update in regard to our strategic plan dashboard, review our special education plan that was submitted to the Department of Education in May, and share with you the newest version of the gifted plan that was approved by our local GAC, our Gifted Education Advisory Council, last week. And then we will conclude this afternoon with sharing information on behalf of a request that has come from Norview High School in regard to a new seal for their high school diplomas. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Corbin, who's going to review our My Access and mock writing results with you and our Achieve 3000 results. Dr. Corbin?
And good afternoon, everyone. If you're looking at the slide that we have here before you, you'll see that we did give our first mock assessment. That window for the mock assessment was open from the beginning of September until the middle of October. And you'll see that we have two ranges here. You see the first submission is in red and the second submission is in blue. Students are allowed to, first of all, enter their information in. They receive some feedback on their writing. Once they receive that feedback, they make adjustments, and the system will automatically rescore that paper. Teachers are also required to give students verbal as well as written feedback on those papers that are in My Access. And if you look at the very first item, these are actually the 6 traits of writing that the students are scored using. However, that very first one, the holistic score, is really what's closest for us in terms of our standards of a learning assessment, because those are looking at our writing prompts. And if you'll notice from the first to the second one, we did see considerable improvement. We saw improvement on our first mock assessments in 5th grade. Likewise, we saw improvements on our 8th grade and on our 11th grade submissions. And again, these were our mock assessments for the first time given for the year, and we will give them several times throughout. This one, when we're looking at My Access, it's really important to remember this is the direct writing portion of the assessment. When students take the actual SOL test in writing, there are 2 parts. And I still like to refer to it as the multiple choice assessment. But they have a multiple choice portion as well as they have the direct writing portion. And this portion that you're seeing here reflects the information on the direct writing piece, where they actually are responding to a prompt. And we do use, again, the Virginia Department of Ed's released writing prompts to work with for our students. The multiple choice portion of it, we do also assess that piece as well, but we assess that using our in-district benchmark assessments, and we will be reporting that data to the board very shortly.
So, for the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th graders that all have the writing assessment done, and this is all on computer,
Correct.
and it's every 5th grader, every 8th grader, every 11th grader.
That's correct.
And then what do the numbers on the bottom of the axis stand for?
Well, you actually have a range. You have a 6-point scale that the students are scored on. And what we want to see, of course, is to have them closer and move closer to that 6. When they actually take the assessment in May, when they take the assessment in March, we'll actually be looking at a 4-point scale as opposed to a 6-point scale. But this one shows us that we are trending in the right direction because, again, this was a pre-assessment that was given at the very beginning of the year. So the students have not had the level of instruction that they will have before that time comes.
And the 4-point scale was the 4-point scale used last year in grading?
That's correct.
Okay. And how does the 6-point scale compare to, like, is 6 for us right now average, or is that
A
above
6 would be
average?
a 6 would be the top of the scale.
The top,
The
okay.
top.
Okay.
And one of the things that we have requested, moving forward, we've requested that the My Access Corporation, that they actually move to the 4, which is what our students will be on, because we want to make sure that we have the exact same reporting that they will see on the SOL test.
And that'll be in time for the second one
That
they
will
get?
be.
Okay,
That's actually in the works right now, but this data was done a little bit earlier.
right.
Brad, what is the passing score for, on the state assessment, on the 4-point scale?
If you have it's actually a combination, because you get 1 score for the direct writing, you have another score for the multiple choice, and they do a merging of the 2. So it's not really a fair thing for me to tell you if you get a 2, you're going to be successful or not, because again, you have to look at that multiple choice range as well, and they merge the 2.
Which of the 6 on the y-axis are most relevant to the 4-point scale elements of, I think, written and expression, counting as 2/3 of the total SOL score? So I think you mentioned holistic is a significant portion of the SOL assessment, but of the 6 to the left, which ones are true indicators of what the SOL is assessing.
The actual SOL score will, they actually look at each one of those elements. But however, when we were looking at the My Access program, the My Access folks are just now getting a chance to input our prompts and our rubrics. And because they like to look at everything on a norm reference base, they said, you know, we look at your holistic score right now. But in terms of the actual SOL test, no, you would look at all 6 domains.
Well, I don't understand. So,
Okay.
we are looking at something that's on the 6-point scale,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of times you said about using our stuff and not using ours. So can you just kind of?
Yeah, let me try to clarify this. All right. My Access uses a 6-point scale. Virginia uses a 4 for grading. What we're doing right now, because this was done in September, October, they had not had an opportunity to move it to our 4-point. So we want to report the data exactly as we got it rather than try to manipulate it to make it fit what we have. We're going to have it in the format that we need in the future. When it comes to these 6 domains, when the state actually assesses a student's direct writing, they look at all 6 of those categories in order to come up with a score for a student. Again, on that 4-point scale, meaning holistic might be in the 0 to 3 range or 0 to 4 range, and the focus and meaning might be in the 0 to 2 and vice versa. But they look at all 6 of those domains there and come up with one common score. Now, My Access right now is still in the process of norming our prompts, meaning you have to have so many different submissions in order to come up with a valid and reliable score. So we said that's fine that you want to be able to norm ours and use our scores versus this city's or that city's, that's fine. But how can we measure where we are? And we advised the best way to do that, look at the holistic score, because that gives you an overall picture, a little snapshot of how our students are doing. Did that help a
Yes.
little?
So I have some follow-up.
But you're still unable to really correlate the 6-point scale to the 4-point.
Well, actually, I could, but I don't want to.
Okay.
My way of looking at it was I wanted to present it the exact way it's given, so that there would not be any confusion about whether data had been manipulated in any way, shape, or form.
That's fair.
Okay, so a few questions.
Sure.
So when we get the next report then, are you gonna go back and put this in the 4-point scale so we can compare apples and apples?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What I'll do is I'll actually I'm going to give you the 6, and what that 6 would look like if it was a 4,
Okay.
and then the next 4 that we have.
And then this is obviously a roll up across the district.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing in terms of, especially at the 5th grade level for our priority and focus schools?
At our focus and priority schools, I can tell you that writing is a focus for our schools, and we are seeing pretty much the same trend. Our students are doing well in terms of direct writing across all grade levels at all of our schools. It's that multiple choice assessment is where we're really focusing, because with the direct writing, they've been practicing that skill from kindergarten, 1st grade, on and on. But with that multiple choice, that's where things have changed. So that's where we're actually putting a lot of our efforts in, and we have our building level specialists as well as district specialists working to make sure that our children have examples of how that portion of the assessment will look.
One last question. And so when you say well relative to what? I mean, so in this snapshot of time, are you looking at, we would have thought that the scores would have been a 3, or are you comparing that to some other
No, at this
norm?
point in time, if I'm looking at a 6-point scale, I would expect to see scores between the 3 and 4 range, which is what I'm seeing right now. That's when I say they're doing well. And of course, we would want to see that progress.
When we get the next report, I enjoyed reading the supplemental material that we had in there that kind of went into the My Access program, that went into Achieve 3000 program. When we're getting the data, if we could break it down into our focus and priority schools, and if we could also break it down into our International Baccalaureate, our EVMS students, all of our magnet-type programs that we have, I would like to follow trends on those schools. So Rosemont, Young Scholars, IB, I think I've said this a couple times beforehand, but just to see how they are doing, and then, again, looking at our focus and our priority schools as well. So be able to disaggregate those groups from all of the 5th graders, all of the 11th graders, all of the 8th graders.
And we certainly can. We can do that. Do we have any?
You have questions, comments? Thank you. Okay. Continue. Thank
All
you.
right, and moving on to Achieve 3000. Achieve 3000, as you know, is another supplemental tool that we use in reading, and it really focuses on allowing the children to have practice assessments on non-fictional texts. And as you can see here, in September, October, and November, we had a consistent level of student participation, meaning we have a consistent number of student licenses available. That's the number of students who have access to the program. You'll see that in September, students had an average Lexile score of 549. Let me tell you what that really means. That means that in the month of September, when students were doing their pre-assessment, and level set is basically a form of a pre-assessment in reading. You had a window for this one as well. The students who had taken that pre-assessment, their average score was 549 in terms of a Lexile. In October, which is when the majority of the students in the district actually completed that assessment, the Lexile score increased to 612. In November, which is when the window was closing for the level set, you had a smaller portion of students actually completing level set at that time. You saw a slight drop to 546. Now, the level set actually, and when I say a slight drop for 546, the level set is actually computed for an average at the end of each month. When we submitted this document, the month had not closed. Therefore, you probably will, if we were to go in right now, you would see a slightly different average. Now, moving forward, you will not see a level set average. You will actually just see how Lexiles are moving beyond, from school to school, from individual student to individual student. Because students have to take a level set at the beginning of the year, they take a post-level set at the end of the year. Throughout the year, you get incremental checks, but the incremental checks are then shown for individual students, and we can also disaggregate that by level or by school or by subgroup as has been requested. Questions on that one?
How is that Lexile considered? Average, high, low, and what's the comparative?
And I do apologize for this because I actually have a sheet that gives a snapshot of what an average Lexile should be per grade level, and I thought that had made it into your hands, and it did not. And unfortunately, I left it over there as well at my seat, but I will share that with you when I take a seat. I'll make sure I get that for you because I don't have them memorized by grade level.
So, can you just explain then, and maybe I just missed it, that's a roll-up of students in what?
It's a roll-up of all the students in the district who took the level set assessment in September, and then it's another roll-up of all the students who took the level set assessment in October, and then it's another roll-up of all the students who took it in November. It's not an aggregate of all 3 months.
Right, but it's from what grade to what grade?
This one is actually entire district, which is a 3 through end of course.
And so each time the exact same number of students took the,
No, and this is where I had a question as well, and I had to go back and say, the way the chart reads was a little misleading because it's not showing you actual participation. It's actually showing you how many licenses are available, how many students have access to the program. That number should change each month in terms of student participation.
Okay.
right, so tell me what you really want me to understand. I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to glean from.
The bottom
this.
line on this is we have this program is in place and it is being used to determine whether our students are how they're growing in terms of a lexile. This particular chart here actually just shows you that each month our students did complete the pre-assessment, and it gives you an aggregate. And I do have it broken down again by level as well as by school, if you'd like to see that information as well, just so you can see how many at the elementary level have completed the assessment and what their actual level set really was, or middle or high.
All right. No other than Dr. King.
I would also like to see a comparative analysis of the scores for Achieve 3000 for our students who take the PSAT and the SAT for their verbal scores, and to see how they compare. And I think I've asked for that a couple of times to say, you know, how does the score on Achieve 3000 compare to SAT verbal scores? And I don't know if Achieve 3000, if the company can give us that comparison, but for now, I would like for us to at least be able to say, well, if they have a score of, you know, 550, this is their score on the verbal portion of the PSATs, because don't all, is it ninth graders begin taking the PSATs?
That's correct. So some groups of eighth graders can take it, but
Right.
it's really
And I
ninth and
think it
10th.
would be good for us to at least see trends or see if there's any comparison between the two.
Right, and I'm not sure if the company can actually do that, but I can work with Karen's department and we can get that together.
And, shoot, just forgot the other question. That's right, I'll come back to it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dr. Corbin, you mentioned that you had a document that you don't have at the podium,
Right. So
that I think would be beneficial for the board in terms of understanding where we are now, what our goal would be ultimately for students at X grade level or students that are of a certain age or age range. So I think that if you have it,
I do.
you don't mind stepping over and getting it, and then providing that information to the board so that they can see what our challenges may be in terms of our needs going forward, as well as where we may be on par. But what I'd like to do too is to remind the governance team that as we do these reports, it is going to be important that we all understand that after September, October, November, 3 months in, there is an expectation or a goal that we ultimately want to achieve. And these reports ought to tell us how we are doing and moving in that direction. So just FYI for all of the administration that is presenting, to pinpoint that so that the board can understand that we feel that we're making moderate progress, or we feel that we're making little progress, or we feel that we are on par in terms of moving towards the goal, because after 3 months, no one expects that we're already going to be at the absolute, but we should have an idea about the rate at which we are moving. And so that's the gist of what we would like for you to hear.
I'm glad you said, I was going to ask you, maybe after this, if you wanted to pause and just kind of talk a little bit more about what we really should be doing in this work session. Along the lines, so for example, we're getting a presentation on writing, but can you speak to why you chose this particular area for us to give attention to at this session, and should we expect at the next session to get the same thing, or will it be a different subject area?
Well, as she prepared, I'll make comments along that line. The writing process was chosen as well as where we are with Lexile. First writing process was chosen because of the fact that it is an expectation across the division that we prepare children in terms of their writing skills, their writing needs across all grade levels. However, the gateway grades will be 5, 8, and 11. So those are the high stakes grades for writing. But writing, of course, should be across the curriculum. And there are certain things that we are doing in each grade level, but we're honing in on grades 5, grades 8, and grades 11. And we're giving what we refer to as mock assessments after the teachers have done various modules to get children ready for writing. So the reason that you're hearing this now is I think it's significant for you to understand what has been done to prepare children leading up to that high stakes test. And it is significant for you to understand not only what has been done to prepare them, but how are children faring so far. And if we're on par, what is considered on par at this point early?
That's what I'm trying.
And if we are on par, fine, what are we doing to sustain that? But if we're not, what are we doing to address that? So that's the purpose of this. And the Lexile piece is because of the gaps from the diagnostic. You all remember the diagnostic. The diagnostics centered on the fact that we have pretty huge literacy gaps, pretty huge numeracy gaps. So the reason we want to pinpoint the Lexile scores is to begin to show movement and growth from one point to another in terms of how children are doing in the schools and how we are supporting the whole notion of literacy throughout. So that's why these two were chosen at this point. In the next work session could be different, but I can tell you that in the next work session, one major piece is going to be benchmark results. But benchmark results are going to be elementary, middle, and high. And so how are elementary schools doing with the benchmark results across all accountable subjects? And that will be the January work session. That will be a heavy piece for that. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how we are recommending items to go on the agenda for discussion so that you will be made aware of these things. And these are the things that will move us to accreditation of schools. That's another reason. Writing, Lexile scores, benchmarks connected to the SOL, all of those things. And it tells you where we are throughout. And so in the end, the fact that we're analyzing and responding, there should be no surprises as to how schools are going to do, because we will know along the way what the challenges are and what we are doing and have done to address those challenges. So, Dr. Cole?
And I'm
Can I
sorry.
ask you a question? Dr. King, excuse
Go
me,
ahead.
just a quick question. So if next session, we're going to look at the benchmarks, could we, at some point then offline, or just however, get then the next version of this data that then would be comparative, that of course I know are leading indicators for what the benchmarks are. So then we would see this change from period to period also. And we wouldn't necessarily need to use work session time for that, because now we know what you're presenting to us and what it means.
Okay, all right, so what I would need would be some clarity on what additional you want, and we can certainly get that.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just part of the discussion at the end of what is it then, if we've discussed something at the work session here, and we know work session next is gonna be focused on that, what do we perhaps get in the meantime, just as data information?
Right, and I, sure, and I think what I hear you saying is that we need to be able to compare, in some sense, apples to apples. And so if benchmark assessments are next month, then how does it compare with what these results are telling us in similar areas? Is that what I'm hearing?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, and in my stack of stuff, because I shoved it down in my bag and Karen's still going through, I couldn't find the sheet with the range, but I do have this one that I'm sure will be a benefit to everyone. This one is comparing how our students were last year in May, June, when they took the post-level set to when they took the level set that they just completed this year. For example, our students who are fourth graders now, last year, the expected Lexile gain from post-level set of last year to level set of this year was 20 Lexile gain, a 20-point Lexile gain. We had a 31-point Lexile gain. For our fifth graders, and I won't read every grade, I'll just hit the 5, 8, and 11. for grade 5, the expected, and this again is national, would be 19 points. Here in Norfolk, we had a 33-point gain. 8th grade, expected would have been 13. We had a 25-point gain. And at 11, the 11th grade, you would have expected a 5-point gain, and we had a 17-point gain in Lexile scores. So our students are trending the right way in terms of Lexiles, and I can make sure that we get copies downstairs for everyone on this form. And once I sit down, I'll dig through my bag and find that other one that has the actual Lexile range that you expect to see for each grade level. Just a little sloppy, I shoved it all in. And of course, this document here is also an aggregate of all of our students and where you would expect to see them in terms of college and career readiness. The company, Achieve 3000, actually has a range of what you would expect to see for each grade level in terms of whether you're approaching college and career readiness or whether you meet college and career readiness, and you can see here where our students are in terms of their Lexile score. But again, this is telling in terms of grades 3 through 12.
So this is looking at third graders and telling us if they're ready for college?
What they've actually done is there's a range for third grade. If you're a third grade student and, without having that form that let's say that Lexile should be 500 to 700, would say that you're actually college and career ready. What they did is they took an aggregate for that and they went through and did it for 3, 4, 5, 6 on up and gave us this master scale. And I believe that we received this broken down by level as well. I think we have this one as well, broken down by level. Do you have any other questions on Achieve or? All right. And I will pass things back over.
Okay, just before our next presenter goes, we want to be sensitive to our members of the community who are unable to see the information. We don't have handouts for them. So those who would like to, we would ask you, if you don't mind, you can bring your chair down to this area here. That way you'll be able to see the presentation. This will be the time. Anyone who would like to. Okay. What kind? Down.
My expectation is that everybody should but it's a tool to supplement but it does tell them the rate level and reading level of children so that we can see that they are moving forward in terms of learning each and every day. That's why I want to do the range of what it should be. Because the gains are there. But you need to know that third grade is but here's what it should be. You see what I mean? And that's what was missing. See? And then that was it.
Okay, thank you very much, and Communication Department, thank you all for making the adjustment along with us. All right, we're ready to
Okay.
continue.
Thank you. Just wanted to provide you with a quick process update in regard to the Common Formative Assessment process, and Dr. King shared some of this information with you just a few moments ago. But I wanted to remind everyone that at the district level this year, we created and have administered a pretest, and we've already shared those results with you at the last work session. They were diagnostic in nature. We're getting ready to finish out our first benchmark. That window actually closed yesterday, so we will have those results for you to share, broken out by elementary, middle, and high, showing growth in regard to the percentage of students who are meeting and exceeding the standard in regard to mastery of the individual SOLs or the standards. So we will share those results with you in January. Then we will administer benchmark 2 in February, and we will share those results with you. And then we will administer a post-test for all of our SOL and EOC courses, and all of those are done via SchoolNet, so that data is available in SchoolNet to go in and look through, and it can be disaggregated many ways. This first semester, as we have been training and building capacity among all of our buildings, we've been training individual teachers and administrators how to use SchoolNet to create their own common formative assessments. The expectation is that buildings create and administer monthly common formative assessments. This semester, they are training and working and creating those assessments and administering them, but not all of them are currently in SchoolNet because it is a growth process for all of our schools this first semester. So our executive directors have been working very closely with our building level leadership teams and those principals to monitor those monthly common formative assessments. And later this afternoon, they will be sharing with you some results from those common formative assessments to share with you how that is being monitored and how the students are progressing towards mastery of the standard. After this meeting, when we move into next semester, which starts at the end of January, we will be able to provide you more regular updates from those common formative assessments because they will be administered in SchoolNet within all buildings, and we'll be able to disaggregate that data and analyze that data rather easily because it will all be located in one place. Right now, because all of our schools are learning, some are already using SchoolNet, some are still using paper and pencil. So we have those results, but the executive directors are really having to work the 13th and 14th hour this semester because they're having to go from building to building and analyze those individually. So we thank them for all of their hard work, and they're going to share some of that with you later. So do you have any questions about the process of the common formative assessment? Okay.
When the students arrive in school in September, they get the pretest.
Yes.
So September is the pretest, and benchmark 1 would be done around what time?
The window opened at the actually it was the last week in October, and it closed Tuesday.
Last week in October, and then into November. Okay, and then benchmark 2 would be.
We'll open in February,
Okay.
and then we will do the post-test around the standardized test window, but right now it's scheduled for the end of March and April.
End of March. And then they go into their SOLs.
Towards the end of May and June.
Okay,
Most of them are in June.
May and June. And then the common formative assessments are just our kind of trackers to see how well they're doing until we get to a benchmark.
Yes.
And then the benchmark is the overall picture, and really we're trying to align our benchmark scores as a glimpse as to how the students will be on the SOLs.
Yes, that is correct. And we will share a full report of all of our benchmarks with you at the January work session.
I just
Yes, sir.
wanted to go back to some of the schools being in SchoolNet and some of the schools not being in SchoolNet, and the efforts that's being made to bring everybody up to par. Why is it that everybody is not on school? I mean, is it a capacity issue that, from a staffing standpoint, infrastructure? Was it anticipated that we would have everybody on SchoolNet when this school year started? Just trying to figure out what's being done to get them there, and is there anything that you need from us to get folks there faster?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking. We began the school year with the expectation that all teachers in all buildings would use SchoolNet. If you'll remember, the first semester expectation was that teachers would train and utilize the lesson planning feature. So we spent the first quarter training all of our teachers and administrators again, because we had done the training last year. We went back and redid the training in regard to utilizing the lesson planning format and the resources and all of our curriculum that now lives inside SchoolNet. When the second quarter began, we started a new regime of training, going to the buildings, working with teachers in their professional learning communities, training them how to access the assessment components of SchoolNet. So we've been training for the last 5 weeks, pushing into every building, working with teachers during their professional learning time or their planning time in how to access the assessment features inside SchoolNet. We have a limited staff of trainers who are working around the clock to push in so that teachers are getting that training during the work day. It's embedded in their regular day, and we have a very intensive schedule for that, but because we have so many facilities, we're having to go to them. So the expectation was, you administer your common formative assessments, but if your building doesn't have the confidence yet with the new tool, it's okay for you to continue with paper and pencil for right now, for today, but with the understanding that in January, those assessments must be done in SchoolNet. So we tried to give everyone a little bit of flexibility because we've done a double round of intensive training this school year already in regard to SchoolNet with the lesson planning and then the assessment component.
Priority and focus schools, are they all on SchoolNet?
I believe most of them are, but I would actually have to defer to the executive directors to clarify if 100% of the focus and priority schools are administering their CFAs within SchoolNet.
So, what percent?
Well, we have four priority schools and 2 focus schools.
Out of my 3, 2 out of 3 of mine are.
So 4 out of 5 priority schools, and both focus schools are using SchoolNet.
So as you all determine your rollout schedule, are you just going, is it geography, alphabetical, or are you looking at certain schools based upon data that would make those schools go before another?
The expectation is that all schools, regardless of their accreditation status, will use SchoolNet for their monthly assessments beginning second semester. And the tool has been open and available for all schools to use this year. But the expectation was with the beginning of second semester, all schools would use it regardless.
And to that point, the real purpose of this and the importance of it is that so that we, as we do, first let's go back to the purpose of common formative assessments. We really would like to have common formative assessments done every 3 to 4 weeks. And so on the average right now, they are being done
Monthly.
every 4 weeks. So that gives us, it is designed to give us the information real time around how much learning has taken place since the teaching of X units have taken place. Those units, of course, are aligned to the SOL. So it tells us how much mastery of the standards really took place over that period of time. That's why CFAs are important to us. However, step 1 for us, of course, was to begin the whole notion of each school doing the CFAs And know that it's important for us that schools understand that we're not asking them to take a CFA and, for the lack of a better way to say it, pile it on top of what you're already doing. Because your CFA is nothing but an assessment or an evaluation or a test after you've taught. So it's a teacher-involved, teacher-made assessment aligned to standard. So it's a test that a teacher is going to give anyway, but it's a CFA based on common formative assessment based on what that teacher has taught. So it should be in addition to, so the whole notion of additional testing and test stress and that kind of thing should be minimized if we do it the right way and not add to. And so it informs the work. It is testing that teachers have to do anyway after they go through their teaching process. They're going to assess to see how much learning took place. That's what this CFA is designed to do on a 3 to 4 weeks period. However, by inputting the information via SchoolNet, it is going to, once we are where we want to be, it is going to give us information by level. Because I can log on, any of the administration can log on, building level principals can log on to see what percentage or what raw number of students mastered the elements of the standards based on what should have been taught, linked to the scope and sequence that's out there. And so then as we see the percentage of children that did master, those that didn't, and those that exceeded, then that is the driving force to determine which children should be in safety nets. Because then you can run a query to and run a roster of students that didn't master certain standards. When you run a roster of students that didn't master certain standards, you take that and align it to your safety net needs. And so that's why it is important for me as a superintendent to know that each school has gotten trained and that they are proficient in being able to input that data, and so that we can get that data back to make informed decisions. So these reports will evolve to the point where when we report about CFAs, then we can report and tell you, here's how we're doing in the aggregate at the elementary level. But we can also disaggregate the data and tell you, here's how we're doing per standard by student subgroup and gap groups. And then we can break it down by individual schools. At this point, for the most part, we can say that each school is delivering and rolling out the CFAs. Many of them are already inputting that information in SchoolNet because they've trained their people and we've trained the people and they're ready to do so. But we're not 100% there yet. But it is important, in my view, for the board to understand why CFAs are needed. And it should not be in addition to another testing item. It ought to be one that teachers work collaboratively around to develop, and it's a quiz or a test that they were going to give anyway. And so that's just a few added points.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Ed, yes, Ed, and then Noel.
Yes, before your administration started building this system of CFAs, were schools in the past, how often were they doing CFAs in the past?
It varied from building to building. The expectation, we gave more benchmarks last year at the district level. We administered 4 complete benchmarks instead of 2 diagnostics and 2 benchmarks. So last school year, buildings were administering CFAs every 6 or 7 weeks, and that was not consistent from building to building, which is why we have the expectation this year that buildings will administer a monthly CFA in line with their units and in line with their sequencing. So we implemented that requirement for this school year of the monthly CFAs.
Just a little bit to make sure that I'm following our timeline. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago when we came on, when you all came on, it was understood that we didn't really have quality CFAs, okay? We were operating as every school kind of individually instead of a school system. And you all spent a lot of time teaching and learning, going through the curriculum, going through the Department of Education, the standards, and trying to make new CFAs,
That is-
correct? Or was it new benchmarks?
The district benchmarks,
Okay.
every district benchmark was rewritten. Every
Okay.
single one of them
Every
was
single
rewritten,
one.
and they're 100% aligned.
And then as far as the CFAs, are they coming down from the teaching and learning department, or are we leaving that to the building, like the math department chair or the science department chair to do the CFAs?
That's a good question, and there's actually two pathways with which the common formative assessments are being developed. Some buildings have been doing this for quite a while and have a very successful system down pat. So those buildings jumped right in and are continuing the process that they were doing with their own creation. But because not every building had that knowledge level or that comfort level, we have started a whole district support structure for that. So we actually are meeting regularly on a regular routine basis with department chairs and administrators who are in charge of certain core subjects to work with them in regard to what does a quality common formative assessment look like. And those particular sessions are being led by our content coordinators and by the teacher specialists who work in those particular core content. And we have more training that will be coming down the road in regard to what those quality common formative assessments look like. But that is an excellent question, Dr. Gabriel, because it lends itself to, we're also having to go back and make sure that teachers, we, meaning the school district, have provided teachers with all the training they need to implement the rigor of the new standards. So it's kind of a dovetail in regard to, we're going back and working with teachers on the content, meaning the actual standards themselves, and while we're also doing that, we're working with them in terms of depth of knowledge, which is the rigor associated with the questions that they are creating and the assessments that they are creating and using to gauge if students are working towards mastery. So it's a very kind of scaffolded approach, but we've got multiple things going on, all leading toward the creation of very high quality, rigorous common formative assessments.
And Dr. King, you had said that the CFAs should be incorporated into the teacher's lesson, like if they're going to do a quiz, this is kind of like how the CFA should be done. So when we're saying CFAs are kind of put into SchoolNet, we're basically just, they're not necessarily taking a test on SchoolNet. They're taking the CFA and then we're inputting that data into SchoolNet, which hopefully everybody will be on by January, and then we can look at all of the trends.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then we'll move into our district academic review. As you're aware, the two members of the Office of School Improvement were here on Monday, November 25th, and they spent an entire day with us reviewing leadership documents and curriculum documents and professional learning documents at the district level. And they were here to help us look at the process and procedures and documents that we have to begin to determine root causes as to why we have 30 schools who are accredited with warning, and then to help us take that information to develop a plan to move forward. So that occurred last week, and today we have very preliminary results to share with you. We do not have the final report yet. We have invited Dr. Yvonne Holloman and Dr. Kathleen Smith from the Office of School Improvement to come to the January work session to officially present our report to you. We're waiting on confirmation from them in regard to that, but today we're going to share the preliminary results, and these are individual scores that we have today. We do not have our composite scores back. Those will be included in the final report, so this is very preliminary data. The scoring took place on a scale of 0 to 3, with 3 being full implementation, 2 functional, 1 limited, and 0 indicating no implementation. We used the scoring rubrics that were provided by the Virginia Department of Education, and as I've said, those scores are very preliminary. We spent a group of us spent the entire day reviewing our leadership documents, and they examined, as you can see listed here, a variety of documents. Many of them were scored according to the rubric with full implementation, and we had 2 of them that were scored as limited limited implementation, and I would like to share with you in a very brief manner why that is. One of the requirements that they asked for was to have an explicit number of observations and visits for principals in focus schools and priority schools listed very explicitly in the Principal Evaluation Handbook. And right now we have that as a separate document. It's not embedded within the handbook itself, it's a separate document. But because those particular numbers of visits were not embedded within the handbook, they gave us a 1 on the Principal Evaluation Handbook, and we'll receive an essential action for that, asking us to take that standalone document listing all of those requirements and embedding it inside the handbook. So we've already made that step moving forward. They also looked at all of the evaluations that took place last year, examined the summative evaluations from teachers last year, and they found a plethora of very explicit feedback to teachers on those to principals, on those evaluation instruments. And it was very specific to the quality of instruction and best practice taking place in their buildings. But after they arrived, they shared with us that they really wanted that feedback to be specific to reading and to math, because those were the areas in which schools were warned. So they acknowledged that we had a plethora of very high quality feedback on those summative evaluations, but because it did not specifically say for reading, please do this, and for math, please do this, it was embedded within the descriptors for the instruction overall. They gave us a 1 on those particular documents that they reviewed. Do you have any questions about this before I move on? Dr. Birdsong, would
I spent a little time in the morning just getting an understanding of exactly what the Department of Ed would be looking for, and then Mr. Jordan and I went back in the afternoon, set for the debriefing, and so there were quite a few items of commendation that Dr. Holloman identified that the district was on point in these particular areas. And then, as Dr. Savigny mentioned, a few items that will be in the final report, essential actions, primarily due to one, wording, and 2, and I don't mean to restate everything she just said, but because I did have an opportunity to observe that day, I thought it was a good opportunity, one, for learning opportunity for me to really understand, and I think for us to get feedback, both positive and recommendations for the district. So we'll look forward to them coming in January if their schedule permits, and I think it's good that the district the administration has invited them to come and present to the board, so that any questions we may have as a board, we could, ask directly to two members of that Office of School Improvement. Yes, Warren.
Dr. Savigny, I was a former Department of Education employee, and I know that our role is to be of technical assistance. So my question is, in regard to the process you just described, in advance of the visit and the monitoring and auditing, were you informed that such evaluative procedures should be focused on math and reading? Was that made explicit to us, in your opinion?
That is not the wording on the rubric by which we were
So they've been helpful
constructed.
to us after the fact, and so we're grateful they are for the future.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Birdsong, would you like to add anything?
You did an excellent job. You were correct. We talked about a document that Dr. King developed for the executive directors to use to give them some guidance in providing feedback to principals. And so that's very clear now. So the executive directors now know that they need to give very specific feedback in the areas of mathematics and reading on the summative evaluations. In addition to that, we did ask about model handbooks that had the specific number of observations for teachers, and we were then told that we could use Dr. King's document to note all of that, because we certainly weren't aware of any handbooks that specified that, because of course that could change on a monthly basis. It could change annually depending upon the superintendent and his expectations, as well as the executive directors. They may go in to do site visits and they determine that additional observations need to be made based upon a teacher's performance or a principal's performance. And so we have taken their recommendation accordingly, and we will move forward.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Jim, just one comment.
Sure.
Kind of a tricky, cynical comment. The movie Jerry Maguire had a wonderful line in with Tom Cruise telling Pretty Goody Joe to help me help you. I'm grateful that we're helping them help us better for the future. And I'm serious. I'm glad they are. But we're helping them refine their tools for assistance. And thank you for doing that.
We had a rather large team who spent the entire day looking through all of our curriculum, and they looked at it from 5 particular components, looking at curriculum alignment, sequencing and pacing, learning experiences, varied assessments, and resources. And the curriculum alignment was in regard to the degree to which our curriculum is aligned to the state's curriculum. And in 3 of the 4 areas, it was a 100% match. And in math, there was a slight difference with our higher courses. We've added things to the higher level math courses and need to enhance those even more. But the 2 there for math deal specifically with some high level high school math courses. For sequence and pacing, everything was either a 2 or a 3 with functional implementation or full implementation, and we agreed with that. The 2s deal more specifically with providing opportunities for students to, we need to build in a little more differentiation time into our sequencing and pacing. That was something that we pulled out of that and gleaned from that, and that's why the 2s are there, and we've already got those plans in place. With the learning experiences, you'll see English has a 2 and science has a 1, and the reason that those are there is because we were encouraged to take our standalone planning guides. You know, all of our curriculum is embedded within SchoolNet, and for many of our courses, our core content, we have a planning guide. And in the planning guide, it contains sample assessments, it contains rubrics, it contains alternate ways to teach specific lessons. It talks about, in some of the areas, beginning with some vertical alignment, looking to the next grade level and looking back to the grade level below. But those documents are not embedded within SchoolNet. They are separate documents. So the state has asked us to take those standalone planning guides and embed those within our curriculum. So when we have done that, then the ones that you see up here will all become 3s. And we already have that process in place. We also are looking to beef up our horizontal and vertical alignment. You've heard us talk before in regard to needing to provide more opportunities for teachers to come together and look at the curriculum from the science, the math, the social studies, and the language arts perspective at each grade level to build that horizontal component, as well as bring teachers together from grade levels above and grade levels below. So we have already begun that. It's just not completed, and that will address one of those asterisks as well. You've also heard us talk about needing to provide more for kindergarten and first grade. That was one of the reasons that this year we went ahead and brought in a kindergarten coordinator and brought in some teacher specialists specific to kindergarten and first grade. And they have not been able to work their way all the way through all 4 content areas. So the one with I should put my glasses on. I'm trying to pretend I don't need them. The one listed with science and one of the 2s with social studies deals specifically with kindergarten and first grade and needing to beef up the rigor and the variety of alternative assessments. And another thing that the state has asked us to embed within our curriculum, and we've already begun to plan with the curriculum coordinators to get the timeline completed for that, is looking at those sample assessments that are provided for teachers in those planning guides that I told you are standalone, which is why they ask us to embed them, and taking those sample assessments and providing more examples for teachers as to how they can differentiate. You've heard us talk a lot about Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. And right now, the sample assessments that we have provided for teachers in those planning guides deal with the holistic class. They are not tiered. So the next task on our to-do list is to go back to those planning guides and differentiate or tier those sample assessments that we have provided for teachers. And once we have finished those items, which are all works in progress, then we will be able to take all of those 1s and 2s and they will become 3s. You also know that many of our action plans in Strategy 3, Plan 19, 23, 24, 27, 32, and 36 all deal with these very issues. So we already have those plans in place and are working through them. So we found this process, as Dr. Houston alluded to be very affirming and validating that we were on track with the plans that we had in place in regard to growth and continuous improvement. And we wish that we had had time to get that completed, but all of our new staff members in regard to kindergarten and first grade and our teacher specialists, we're working through it as quickly as we can, but it's a very deep, difficult component, and we need to make sure that it's right. So we're working through it slowly so that it is quality material that we are publishing for our teachers to use. Cool.
Brad has a comment and then.
Dr. Savigny, I'm sure you've already got this in your mind. You're talking about vertical alignment. We seem to lose a lot of kids at the transition zone from elementary to middle and middle to high school. And I know when you're talking vertical alignment, you are emphasizing those transitions to help those kids along.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And just a few comments. The takeaway for the Board of Governors
Leadership team for the board, I'll say first, would be the end in reference to this centers on the board wanting to rest assured that the curriculum is aligned. We pinpointed last year the gaps and said to the board that there were some issues with alignment across elementary, middle, and high. This gives you an assessment of the changes, including the rewriting of the scope and sequence, the pacing guides, all the things that should be handed to the building level leader, also to the individual classroom teacher, to ensure that each teacher knows the standards that are important for their particular subject areas. And to know that they have the aligned scope and sequence that links to the SOL. Simply means that if you follow the cycle for results, step 2 says that the teacher will teach standards-based, provide standards-based instruction. Well, in order to do that, we have to give them the appropriate tools and resources to ensure that what they're teaching is what children should know and be able to do. That's step 1, and that's what this is about. And so, just wanted to kind of make that point. I think that's probably what you heard, but that's essential, that what we put in the hands of teachers, and we have to get better with that as well, allow teachers to begin to work smart. They're already working hard, we know that, but how do we give them the tools that are necessary so that they can go into SchoolNet ultimately and pull model lesson plans out, and when they teach, they know that what they're teaching will prepare children, as long as children are mastering the elements of the standard at the appropriate level. So I think this is a key piece and a key report for the board.
My question was for the curriculum alignment for the math. What were the upper level courses that we weren't just yet at alignment with?
They're aligned, there just is not enough resource material in there for them.
Okay.
So, and we actually have more than the state does
Okay.
in the framework, but we still need to add more.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we also one group spent the day looking at professional learning, and you can see the documents that they reviewed. I do want to stress to you why the literacy plan and the numeracy plan received a score of 1. You all have received copies of both of those plans and have read them. And you know that they begin with, after an analysis of our data, comma, and then it goes on to talk about our plan. The state asked us to expand that introduction and include the specific standards upon which our plans were created. They felt that there was not enough information in the introduction, that we needed to be very specific and say which standards in which grade levels before we listed what we were doing and why. So and we're working to go back and cut and paste that information out of our newsletters and put it in to that introductory component, and that will be taken care of very soon, and then those 1s will become 3s as well. Any questions about this? Okay.
So I sat, as Dr. Houston mentioned, I sat in on the, what was it, the briefing. And mind you all know I'm not a PhD and don't have degrees in education. So trying to understand all that was being said and marry it to what's being presented. But I did take some notes, and so I want to know if you can help me understand some of the notes that I took. So one, when you all went through the process, were they self-assessments?
It more or less was a self-assessment. We had, the state divided us into teams, and there was one State Department person that worked with the leadership team all day. There was a State Department person who worked with the professional learning team all day. But then we had a curriculum coordinator paired with an executive director, and other individuals from the central office and the teaching and learning component, and they reviewed the curriculum and the 5 aspects of curriculum using the rubrics that were provided by the Department of Education.
So when you were mentioning the assessments before, so for example, I noted in the math area, there was the comment that, at least maybe I wrote the comment, that assessments got a 1 but could even be a 0. So when they were talking about assessments in the room, and then we just had all this presentation on common formative assessments, can you help me understand? Because I walked away kind of feeling that we've been hearing a lot about common formative assessments and the importance of assessments, but then as I sat in the review, it seemed to me that there was suggesting that, or you all were having conversation around that maybe our assessments were not up to the level that we needed them to be. So can you explain that? And if there is a gap, then as we heard earlier about the common formative assessments, are we assessing what needs to be assessed, in particular as we were looking at these priority and focus schools?
Yes, I believe I can alleviate your fear with that
Okay.
one.
Please.
When they were assessing that column that said buried assessments, they were not looking at district-created assessments. They were looking at the types of assessments that we provide in those planning guides for teachers to use. So what they want to see in our planning guides is very prescriptive. They want to say that if you are teaching math standard 6.2, then here is a sample assessment that you can use in your classroom with your students to determine mastery of this standard. And they want to see that sample assessment differentiated or tiered for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 students. And that's where we got into trouble. We have the assessments and those sample assessments there in most places, but they're not tiered. So we have to go back to those planning guides and take those assessments and tier them, meaning if you're a teacher, you could use this assessment for your Tier 1 students, and this assessment for your Tier 2 students, and this assessment for your Tier 3 students. That's what they were looking at, is the quality and the samples and the types of assessments that we were providing for teachers to use in their classrooms within our curriculum. They were not looking at CFAs, and they were not looking at district-created assessments. It's two different
Right,
vehicles.
Just so in my language, so if my daughter is in her pre-cal or calculus class, then the suggestion was that the assessments that were being provided to the teacher to teach, I don't know, whatever the particular topic was, needed improvement, so that the teacher would have samples for how to then assess whether or not my daughter is learning what it is that she was taught in that particular area. Is that correct?
Their recommendation was that we add more to the higher, if you're specifically referencing high school math, those higher level courses, which is where we had the most issue with math. They did ask that we add to it. And when we analyzed those particular components in those higher level math courses, we found, even though the state was telling us that we needed to put more, and we agree, we do, and we are, we did find that in some courses we actually had more than the DOE provided on the framework. That did make us chuckle just a little. But we are working on that. All of our teachers are provided with what they need. We just need to go back according to what the state provided us in their feedback and take that sample assessment that your teacher's child your child's teacher has, and flesh it out more for her, because there may be 5 questions there for he or she to assess mastery of the particular standard that they're working on. The DOE asked us to take those 5 questions and reformat them so that the teacher would very easily be able to look at that assessment and say, for my Tier 1 kids, those kids who are getting it, who I can work with as a big group, use these questions for those kids. Those kids that I need to work with in a small group, my Tier 2 kids, use these questions to assess their mastery. And those Tier 3 kids, those kids who really need that one-on-one because they're truly not getting it, use these questions to assess those children. So the DOE has asked us to take the sample assessments that we provide for teachers and greatly flesh them out in terms of tiers. So that is why we got the 1 in that particular area.
I think part of the confusion is because the way they use the word assessment, because when we went through the training ourselves, when I hear assessment, I think common formative assessment or benchmark assessment or some summative type of assessment, but that's not quite the way they're looking at it in terms of the curriculum review. For the curriculum review, they really meant I think of it more as a check for understanding. Within our curriculum, we actually put a sample assessment, not a bubble. We gave you an example of 5 or 6 questions that you might ask, or an activity that you might implement to determine whether the student actually mastered that. Not a common formative, just an activity or a quick check to see, are they ready to move on? And that's where Dr. Savigny is saying we were asked to beef that up, because yes, you gave a quick assessment or check for understanding, but can you differentiate that? Have one for those who got it the first time, add another chunk for those who need to have some more instruction and come back again, and then yet another one for our tier 3 students. That's what they were talking about in terms of assessment, and that did get confusing for everyone, and we kept having to go back around and around. So yes, we do have a sample assessment in the terms they're talking about, but we have to beef that up for everyone, for the different tiers of students, and also to make sure that we have, in terms of some of the resources, to make sure that our resources, when you saw those ones and everything, to make sure that they are differentiated. And as Dr. Savigny said, we have all those resources that we shared with you, because we brought, we did share those at a board meeting showing you how you can access those. They said it's great that teachers can access those in SchoolNet, but now can you link them so that if you wanted to have a hard copy, that you, instead of having to have this tab for that and this tab for that, can you put it all in one huge document? Now, granted, it will be 5,000 pages when you print it, but we're in the process of fixing that for you right now, so that will be done.
And then on professional development, are you finished with that slide, or am I jumping ahead?
I was finished, yes, sir.
Okay, so the other thing that I thought I heard quite a bit was, and also when I look at IndyStar, it's like there's a lot of concern both in IndyStar and what I thought I heard in the meeting around the professional development that needs to take place from central administration to the principal, the principal to the teacher, and so on and so forth. So we've had a lot of conversation the last several months around professional development. So can you just kind of tell me where we are? Because I know at the last work session there was some conversations around certain professional development that has been done, some that has not been done. Earlier today, you were mentioning that you're out there doing professional development on SchoolNet and some other things. And so just give me a feeling of where we are with our professional development. Again, I want to ask like I asked before, do you need additional support and resources to get everybody who needs professional development fast enough and soon enough as we go into the second quarter, so that we can have the type of ends and outcomes that we want to have?
We are offering 100% more professional learning this year than we did last year, but we still need more. We still need more. We are utilizing every minute during the day that we can to reach teachers and teach administrators, but we always need more. We are in our cycle for results, and our focus on continuous improvement pushes us to grow more every day as professionals. So if you're asking me, would you like me to publicly say that we would like to have more staff dedicated to professional learning, I'm not going to look at Dr. King and I'm going to say, yes, we would love to have more staff dedicated to professional learning. And we will be putting forth some recommendations for that with this upcoming budget cycle.
You're talking about upcoming,
Yes.
I'm talking about right now.
We are expending the talents of individuals in every way, shape, and form that we possibly can. Most individuals who are in the teaching and learning department spend most of their time out in the field working with teachers and administrators. So we are redistributing duties right now so that we can have more boots on the ground in the classrooms, in those professional learning communities, working with teachers and administrators, because we need teachers in the buildings teaching every day, so we have to go to them to work with them during their planning time and their PLC time.
I'd like to yield to Dr. Stewart, and I have a comment afterwards.
Okay. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, now we're going to just take the one example of one standard and take tier 1. The follow-up questions or the follow-up methods you might use to assess for folks that generally get it to begin with. Or tier 2 for those who may need a little more special help, or tier 3 for those who need a lot more special assistance. the items which you are developing, which now are becoming common and formal assessment at 3 levels, differentiated, are you sharing those with the state? And is 133 other school systems sharing those with the state? And then, will we have the benefit of 134 school divisions and all the benefit of their test items and their assessment items so that we can develop a pool from which our teachers can draw rather than everybody inventing every assessment for all the tiers every day?
Right. We are always willing to share.
But is the state asking us to?
As of today, or last week, when they were here with the rubric, they did not request that information. But we do have a very strong, supportive partnership with the DOE and the Office of School Improvement. We could not ask for better partners and stronger support. So we are confident that as we continue to move through this and they continue to move through these district-level academic reviews and these common trends and common needs begin to surface, that there will be collaboration among districts.
Just a follow-up comment. I think if we're willing to share with others, it would be wonderful if they were willing to share with us, and that would help form a more perfect union of testing.
We agree.
Sorry. Well, can we have a board conversation for a minute there? Because I just want to get some clarity around some of the concerns that have been raised about the state, whether or not they're helping and so forth. When I was sitting in the review, what I felt I heard loud and clear is we have so many schools that are priority and focus. We have 30 to 31 schools that are in warning, and that should signal to all of us a sense of urgency and crisis and emergency. And one of the things that was mentioned, that especially for the priority and focus schools, that it should be clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we're doing X for all schools, we should be doing X plus Y for those schools that we know are in the category that they're in. And so even as we were getting the presentation, I've just made notes throughout around trying to drill down on the priority and focus schools. You know, just what are we going to do as a board to make sure that we are drilling down on that as a governance leadership team and giving attention? Because sometimes when I hear the conversation going back and forth around what the state is doing, whether or not they are our friends or not, I mean, the state is here because we have children in schools in crisis. If we didn't have children in schools in crisis, they're not there at those other places. And so I'm just trying to get a feel for, are we feeling that and seeing that, and therefore have a sense of urgency and are going to, moving forward, whether it's our regular sessions or work sessions, making sure that we are drilling down to give special attention to those schools, to make sure that if there is a need for additional professional development, that, you know, maybe we can get some recommendations around budget and some changes we may need to do right now to try to make sure that these schools that are in crisis are getting, getting all that they need. And for me, even as I listen to this and noting from some of the conversations that we have around hard to staff schools and the schools that may have less experienced teachers, I mean, it's just the amount of stuff between dealing with the governance teams and professional development and the My Access and the School Net and the Achieve 3000 and trying to get parents, and I just cannot imagine the level of stress and anxiety that those teachers and those principals and those families are dealing with. And so, how do we, in a work session like this, get some recommendations or have some conversations around what we can do, if anything, to to help there? And we know later we're going to talk about where we need to be raising the ceiling, but I'm not always comfortable that when we get presentations that we really are understanding or getting a good feel for us, I think the administration gets it, I'm saying from a board level, that there's some real challenges out there and some real stressed principals and teachers and students that need some support. And I just want to make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing to give them all the support that they need to be successful. And I don't know how to gauge that sometimes from some of the measures that we're looking at.
I think that, and this is just my opinion, that the things that really separate the priority and focus schools from the others that are merely warned is the fact that due to a long period of time of dealing with the same issues and symptoms that are prevalent in the other schools, it has become in these schools chronic. And I think that the same approaches to the priority schools have to be taken as we're using in other schools in terms of everything that we're receiving. Multiple assessments to really determine how much learning is taking place, which is merely diagnostic, and then providing the professional development and other supports that help the teachers be more, the teachers' capacity in their instruction of those students. But I think, and I want to use a quick example. I currently serve on the Mayor's Task Force for the Reduction of Poverty, and I'm on the work team for neighborhood revitalization. And one of the things I said in that meeting is that you can't talk about any of this stuff alone because the problem is so complex that there are multiple factors. And so what we're getting is really an area of teaching and learning, but where the rubber meets the road, where the kids don't have the reinforcement in the home or the ability to follow up at home because of lack of internet and other resources, lack of parental involvement, and the disciplinary issues. I think all of this really contributes to the outcomes. And so I'm certainly in agreement that we have to, as a board, as a governance team, continue to analyze and assess from the teaching and learning aspect, what can we do to provide continued support and make sure that the resources are there. But I think we have to look at these other areas also that are, in my opinion, contributing factors to this, other than just what goes on in that classroom.
I don't disagree. I think we've always talked about the school effect and the community effect.
Right.
But for example, if for example, SchoolNet is a important tool to do the work that needs to be done, and then we hear that not all of the priority and focus schools have SchoolNet,
Right.
then that has nothing to do with whether or not I'm reading to my child at home or not. That is about making sure there is equity or whatever else is needed to ensure that the schools have the resources that they need. And since we chose to set up the zones that take a challenged neighborhood to then create a challenged school, then when those children come into that building, what are we doing to try to ensure that there is equity, so as much as the school effect can do what we are here to do, that's happening. So I don't disagree that there's a whole host of factors, and you all know I'm on the Challenge School Task Force, and we've been talking about those. I'm just trying to make sure right now that for those priority and focus schools right now that we know that we have, and those schools that are in warning, as a board, are we providing the administration everything that it needs to be successful? And is the administration comfortable with telling us everything that you need from us to do that? And then we have to be able to monitor to make sure that collectively we're following up so that, children
And
are
so perhaps
successful.
what'll help us in that area, and I'll be quiet, is the same thing that the district is providing to the teachers, professional development on our part, which we'll get on the 28th of January, that conference on the school board's role in area of school improvement. Perhaps we need to gain a little bit more understanding of exactly what our role is and how we, and hopefully in this conference we'll get more ideas, thoughts on how we can provide different avenues of support for the governance team. Now, the other question about is, superintendent and his team comfortable sharing with us what they need, I think is another good question. Sam, Warren?
I think what we are embarking upon with what we're doing, work sessions, it really opens the door to do this, and rightly so, it needs to. It is my recommendation that the board begins to think about what I refer to as differentiated support in terms of resources, which means that sometimes it simply means that you use what you have differently, and that way we support one school is not going to be the same way we support another school. And if we don't have SchoolNet in 1 out of the 5 schools that I think I heard one of the executive directors mention, what does it take to fix that? And so, and what is the price tag and the timeline? And then you look within your current budget to say, okay, what do we need to move and do different? I think that is the manner in which the board needs to begin to think in order to support our work, because that would mean that we would have to make some changes somewhere. And that's why in cabinet we always talk about every department is important. That's why the CFO's role is a vital role in terms of understanding the whole landscape from an aerial standpoint around student achievement and what that means. And that's why we are beginning to do what we do across departments. But to Mr. Jordan's point, I do think the term differentiated is important for how we do the work, because in these schools the needs are varied from school to school, and we need to be able to have some flexibility, and we need to be able to be creative to give those schools the support that they need. So, for example, one might need an additional executive coach as a leader in the building. Another may be we need to support the technology infrastructure so they can bring SchoolNet in. Another piece may be that we need to move, we got literacy and numeracy coaches, but it may be that some schools that might not have such an urgent need might share, and then that school has more than 2, and it's part-time. And so there are ways to use the resources within in that way, but that's a paradigm shift in thinking that we need to open the door to. So I think that's a seed that needs to be planted around how we do the work, especially for the remainder of the year, to squeeze every ounce of performance out between now and then.
I think the simple answer, Mr. Jordan, from one person who does have a PhD in curriculum instruction and is an educator, the answer is yes. I see a great deal more on the cusp of being done. Personally, I think doing the professional development for the schools that have been identified through the testing, you can't do that without doing it for everyone. So now we're laying a base down so that everyone understands the language of instruction, that our curriculums are the same, that everything is moving together. It is the excitement of having everyone finally understand the same language, talking the same language, moving together in the same way, and then the more of those additional plans for those schools. The more time they need, the more encouragement of parental involvement through the compacts, all of that. But first is laying the foundation of all doing the same good instructional process. One of the things that has excited me the whole time that Dr. King has been here is the understanding of the instructional process and making sure that everyone is talking the same language throughout the system. I see the answer to that is yes. I think we're on the cusp of the more, and I see that as great possible. I think that's where we're going to come in when we start talking budget. As it pertains to the subtle, not so subtle comments regarding state employees, I think most of them are wonderful, caring educators. As you can see in the news, it is how the tests are used. Not that the tests are done, because we need to do them, and they can be of assistance with us. I think if you were to ask those caring, wonderful people that we're helping become better helpers to others, because we are helping them become better helpers of others, I think they would tell us that how the tests are used is critical, and therein lies 40-plus school systems questioning how the tests are used. But I think the answer, short answer is yes, I see great betterment getting ready to happen, already happening in the professional development, and my guess is that Dr. King may speak to us about more professional development time. But when we start giving more time, and that means more tier 3 assistance. Yeah, the folks that really need help, some of the help needed because of economic disadvantage. So my answer is yes to that.
And I think one of the things that would really help, and we've asked this question just as the state asked the same question, if we are always getting a clear understanding of what are we doing in terms of the focus of priority schools differently than last year, and what are we doing different for a school that is priority than a school that isn't. I think if that's very clear to us, it also will help us to know better how we can provide additional support and resources. Okay. All right, I would also just provide a warning in terms of the time and the agenda, that it's 3:17. We're still under A, actually. Haven't made it quite to B yet. Yeah, and so, I mean, which is okay. I think what we'll have to do, because we received this information a few days ago, that as we move forward, we at some point we might say, what do we want more information on? What do we have questions about? And not necessarily get the formal presentation. So I'm not registering the complaint, just letting us know. And I think it's really important that at 4:30, we make sure we start the budget discussion, because that is really critical for our work today, that we really hammer out our budget goals for the year. And so I think about 4:30, we need to scurry to that part of our conversation. Okay, and we do have between now and the meeting on the 18th for further follow-up questions that we can submit to the administration if we have other questions on the material that we've received. Brad?
I almost hesitate to say this, but in an entrepreneurial sense, discipline is freedom. And we have to be disciplined as a board to give the administration marching orders. You have these schools to take care of, you have these things to do, and then do it and get out of their way. I think sometimes we have a tendency to overanalyze the situation to try to guide the administration instead of letting them guide us. And we've got so many things that we have to address, and so many pieces of the agenda. If we keep digging so deep in this, drilling down so deep on a consistent basis, we can't do it. I mean, it's just too much to do. So that's just my 2 cents.
Brad, I would respectfully disagree on that point. I think it's one part of our job as the board to understand all that's going on in the district, so that we can, with due diligence, provide the leadership and support along with the superintendent that's necessary for us to have continuous improvement in the district. And I think also, as we approach this work for the first time this way, making this adjustment, the reason I haven't thrown a flag on the discussions is because I think our work sessions need to become this kind of conversation. And because we have this information now, as we move forward, I would ask that we say, okay, what do we really want to talk about next? What do we really want more information on as we move through this? Obviously, we won't be able to receive the rest of the presentations in this manner. But I think we have to have this kind of dialogue, and I think the more we have it, the less we'll have to have it, because we'll have clearer understanding, deeper understanding of the common formative assessments, of the professional development, of pacing guides, and all of these things that we're really being educated on as board members who, are not by formal training, educators. And so as we grow as a governance team, we won't have to stop so long and so often in these kind of presentations, because we would have the kind of background knowledge and undergirding understanding that's necessary for us to move a little quicker and smoother.
I get the point. I guess what I'm trying to get to, at least in terms of the focus in priority schools, what are we saying as a board that we are expecting to see that then allows for the administration to move forward? And so whatever it is that we say we want to see monthly, it allows us to monitor the marching orders that we give. I agree with you. I'm just saying to you as one board member, I'm not clear what our marching orders are to the administration or what our guidance is to the administration as it relates to these priority and focus schools that, we're leading the statewide lawsuit around some of the, other recommendations that are coming forward. So if we don't provide some type of focus and attention, I think we yield to others to make recommendations for us.
Like I said, I hesitated to make that comment.
That's
because
okay.
Because I didn't want to open up that debate, but there's just a massive amount of work.
Since this is a working discussion, and I really have enjoyed the discussions that we have had, and it really brings clarity for me, as someone who is really interested in making sure that I understand the tremendous amount of work that is being done by everyone a part of the team.
Sure.
But maybe we can just ask the board to follow the cycle of results. Because if you look at the cycle of results, you have standard-based instruction, you conduct formative assessments, and then we're given information. It says utilize and analyze formative assessments to check for mastery. So then we're giving a presentation on the analysis, and we get a lot of presentation. But then at what point does the board come together and have the discussion on, this is the analysis, what are we gonna do about it?
Right.
And then, not only what are we gonna do about it, but then how are we gonna follow up on what we've done? And I think that's, might be what Rodney, and I know that's what I definitely wanna hear, because I like getting the presentations, but I also wanna know, okay, board, this is what we need you to do. When you come up to the budget, we need X amount of dollars for professional development for these priority and focus schools. And then board, what we need you to do for safety nets is gonna be this amount of dollars. And then that tells us, that puts us in the mindset of, all right, this is what we need to do. And then when we come back to step 5, we check back and say, well, we did give you the money, how did it end up working out? Or we did give you the ability to shift human resources personnel around. How did that end up working out? We gave you a 5th executive director. How did that end up working out? So that's where I see us needing to have more discussion, involvement, leadership as part of the governance.
And if you apply it directly to what the key work of school boards say that the board's work job is, four of those 7 items talk about setting standards along with the superintendent. So you set standards, assessment, accountability, and the stewardship and management of resources. So in just those 4 areas there, if we already know what our standards are, where we want to go. That's setting our mission and our vision, and then our goals and priorities. Then how do we assess this? By receiving these reports, how do we hold the district administration accountable? And then how do we make the necessary adjustments and the use of our resources? That is certainly where we need more, direct feedback from the administration that says, here are our specific needs, and then we determine how we allocate annually the budget to make sure that those needs are being met. So I think we're on track in terms of our development as a governance team in becoming that kind of team. And I think our anxiety comes from the fact that we have so many schools that are not meeting the standards. So we're anxious, and we ought to be, and saying, okay, how can we fix this now? And I think the anxiety is valid, but I think we also have to manage the anxiety because there's no overnight fix, but we certainly want to make sure that we're doing the right things right now to make progress at the greatest rate possible. So I would ask, as we move forward, that you'll finish up this part on the academic review in terms of what's next. Then, as we move to each one of these areas, I would ask us to share what information we want to hear more about or questions we have when we get to the gifted education plan, the special education piece, that we don't get the presentation as prepared, because again, we can't proceed like this and get through all of this in the next hour. That's just impossible at 3:26. So, Dr. Svidnik, if you finish this piece of it,
Yes.
And then I recommend we proceed as suggested.
She just Corbin just has a couple of statements.
Okay,
Clarify.
good enough. All right?
Okay. Dr. King and Dr. Houston have both alluded already to the fact that we did perceive this process to be validating for our cycle of growth and our journey of continuous improvement. And we will and are taking very seriously the recommendations by the VDOE, and we'll have expedited timelines to share with you in January in regard to how all of this will translate into action. So we'll share that with you in January. We did receive some commendations from the process, and these are just a few. I asked Dr. Holloman to send them to me, and these are the ones that she sent. She said there were others, so they were very complimentary of some new processes that we have in place, and we are appreciative of that, and we'll take all of this to heart as we continue to grow in the spirit of continuous improvement. I do want to make two quick comments before we step away from this. I want to make sure everyone understands that SchoolNet lives in 100% of our schools. Everyone has SchoolNet. Everyone has access to SchoolNet. There are just some schools who are not creating their common formative assessments in them today, and that is by their choice. So it lives everywhere. Everyone has access to it and all of the resources. The other piece, Mr. Jordan, is that we do have very prescriptive action plans for each of our schools that are broken down week by week, and we can share those with you if you are so inclined to look at those. But they're specific to the focus and priority schools and broken down on a week-by-week basis as to what needs to be done and who's doing it. So we can share those with you as well. Exactly. Okay, I would like to ask Dr. Bailey to share with you quickly the progress that we're making in regard to the creation of our dashboard for the strategic plan. Okay, sorry.
Very quickly, in reference to some questions we had earlier about where students should be in terms of Lexile per grade level, I did give you a package that went over the average Lexile score for a grade band. Also, I gave you the sheet when I referenced the percentile growth that we had made in the district. I gave you that information. And if you'd like to see where our students average, this is where you have a sheet that says where our students should be in terms of reading their Lexile for that grade level. And I can prepare that report for you that actually tells you where our individual students are grade level by grade level by grade level. That one was a little lengthy, and I didn't want to print that out here at the school, but I can get that for you.
Okay, questions or comments on? Okay, all right, thank you. Dr. Bailey?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I believe that Janelle has handed out a sheet that resembles this for you. If you could take that out real quick, briefly. We are working with Emerald Data Solutions, which is the author of Board Docs, and they have offered to design not only our scorecard, but a dashboard of our strategic plan. And what I did to try to expedite the process is to give them a sample of a dashboard that we would like to see that not only highlights the information by priority area, but you can also get it by strategy area, department area, or a status on individual plans that have been completed or have not started. And so this is just a simple display to give you an idea of what we hope to have for you sometime in the future. I did talk with them today. They don't have anything to share with us at this time, but we are working with them to put together not only a dashboard, which gives you that web presence, but also a scorecard for us to inform you. That's all that I have.
Okay, yes, Courtney, sure.
What is the timing related to that, and will we have an opportunity to see that dashboard before it's kind of put permanently in place?
Permanent in place. They have not given us any feedback as to where they are with it. I took the liberty to put this together. They do have a spreadsheet of all of our data elements that we need to have behind the dashboard. So we're just waiting to hear back from them to see how we can have a discussion and then give you something more definitive to look at.
Yeah, I think if we could see something before it's kind of put in stone, that would be
Yes.
helpful, so that we're just on the same page.
Yes.
And then again, if you could just give us a feeling, not necessarily today if you don't have it, but soon, of what the timing may be of when we might see this.
Okay. Yes, we can get that to you.
And are we migrating to Pro?
I'm sorry?
Are we migrating to Board Docs Pro?
Yes, yes.
And that'll be effective,
Well, I'm not sure about overall migrating, but certainly as it relates to the strategic plan, they have offered to design this for us and put it together for us. So I'm assuming that the other components of board docs would be adopted or put in place.
Okay. Other questions on this?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a cost associated with migrating over to Board Docs Pro, and we're looking to find the revenue to make that purchase. And as soon as we have analyzed where that funding stream will be, we'll go ahead and make that purchase so we can transition over. But we have not had the opportunity to sit down with board leadership yet and flesh all of that out. So that will be in the very immediate future.
as a point of clarification, so previously when we did have Board Docs Pro, was that in what we call the board's budget area that we worked out, or was that someplace else?
School board.
So we could look at whether or not I think we probably have already stressed it, but.
Well, we could look at it.
But we need to
Yeah,
look at
board's budget.
within our area.
Yeah. It's definitely.
Be cheaper than any other alternative for the same information.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot of power that we're not using as a board, that we
Exactly.
could be taking advantage of.
So we'll take a look at the board's budget, and see if we have some flexibility there. I guess we won't.
No, she just took a look at it, I think.
No more meals.
Okay, so you've had that meeting with board leadership.
Thank you.
Well, I will say this, just thank you very much for doing that and for looking into Board Docs Pro, and so much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanted to spend just a second in regard to the special ed plan. The plan was crafted by Dr. Valika Gatling and her team before she transitioned away to another district, but it was submitted to the VDOE in May and currently lives there. This year, we have a strong focus on training for all of our special ed teachers, specific to having standards-based IEPs, making sure that we are enhancing and ramping up the quality and the rigor associated with instruction taking place inside our special ed classrooms. And we have Janice James Mitchell with us this evening if you have any questions specific to the special ed plan. But it's been living in Richmond since May, and Dr. Gatlin took care of that before she left. And I believe you got a copy of that.
And I would simply ask, newsworthy, noteworthy items relative to this plan and how we're progressing, or significant challenges that we're faced with right now that the board needs to be aware of, we would welcome that information.
It's very specific to training.
Mm-hmm.
There is a strong focus this year on retraining all of our special ed teachers in regard to the rigor associated with the new standards and making sure that all of our IEPs are rigor-rich. So we're having to go back and Janice has a very rigorous, deep plan in regard to retraining all of our teachers. We've retrained all of our administrators and our special ed leads, and that training has already begun and will continue until we are confident that every teacher is comfortable with a standards-based IEP process.
So that they're rigor-rich and being followed.
Yes, sir. That's part of our monitoring that takes place.
Which is really important, because you can write the best IEP in the world, and they don't follow them. We cheat the kid.
You are exactly correct, and we are monitoring on a regular basis. One of the things that Janice did was restructure the department when she came on board in July to have more boots on the ground in our buildings, in our classrooms, doing exactly that.
Just want to remind you, last year we invited representatives from the SEAC to come and present to us, and maybe at a future work session we could have representatives from the SEAC and GAC come and just, give us their viewpoint or vantage point, or how we can be supportive of them as well. I think we had talked about that when we were working on the restructuring.
Yes.
Would that be better for a formal board
I mean, you all
That's
can,
what I'm trying to think, that,
I don't know.
where they would be, especially since the public would want to hear it.
I'll leave
I
that
know
to
we
you
have
all.
a place, Janelle says we have a
We have a
placeholder.
placeholder for, we just haven't scheduled it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You all can
We'll
turn
figure
this
it
out.
out. Okay. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
And with our gifted plan, you were also provided a copy of that, and it is stamped draft at this moment because we need the school board to approve the newly revised plan. It was crafted under the leadership of Ms. Lori Banks, who is here, if you have any specific questions, in close collaboration with the Gifted Education Advisory Council, and you received a list of all the individuals and the dates by which this plan has been worked on over the last 2 years. It's been a very long process to bring the plan forward. We do have a plan on file with the Virginia Department of Education, but this plan, once it is approved by you, will be submitted to Richmond to replace the plan that is currently on file for Norfolk Public Schools. The new plan embraces our new model, particularly at the elementary level, and it has a stronger focus on training for all of our teachers as well as our administrators in regard to gifted education, the identification of gifted, and the social emotional support of all gifted learners.
So this becomes an example of an item that, once we receive the necessary information that we want on this, that it would be an action item for the business meeting following the work session. So, so this is ready for our analysis and recommendations for adjustments and approval, and then the next step would be to take action on it, yes.
Correct.
So, two things. Anything that you all know, Dorian or Melinda, that we need to know about this, or then any questions that we have or concerns about the plan, that would help prepare us to take action on it, and either on the 18th or next month. Yeah, are you looking for action this month?
If we could get action this month, it would be fabulous, so that we can send it to Richmond to replace the plan that's on file. The plan that's on file in Richmond is a little bit outdated.
Sure.
So we would love to have the new plan replaced the
So I
old
think there's some
plan.
questions or concerns from my colleagues to the left.
Which colleagues we got? 1, 3, 2, 1.
So, questions? Are there any questions or comments on this? Yes, colleague to the right.
I'd rather be on the left, but I'll assume. I heard you say that the special ed plan is in Richmond.
Yes.
And therefore, we don't need to approve that again.
That is correct.
But the gifted plan, we do need to approve.
Because we wish to submit this one to replace the one that
Yes.
lives in Richmond right now. Yes.
I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
that. Thank you.
Okay.
As I was reading through this, and for this is relatively new for me, I'm reflecting on some of the conversations we've had here regarding the funding for gifted teachers, and do we have enough gifted teachers in the schools today, and is gifted instruction being given consistently because maybe we don't have enough gifted teachers? Does this plan say things that we're doing that maybe we're not currently right now because we don't have the resources in place? And I also noted in here, there was a page where it spoke about budget 2014. So it was clearly dependent on a budget coming up as well. And I'm sorry, I have a dog tag, but I don't know exactly where it is. It was actually on page 13. Budget implications 2014-15, additional staff needed for testing. That's just one example. So my question is, can you submit it to Richmond if in fact we don't have the resources to implement what this asks us to do?
Everything that's in the plan, we have the current resources to fulfill. That is a recommendation for the future, and we've already submitted a placeholder to Dr. Thornton in regard to providing an additional staff member for the Academic Rigor Office for the next school year. But everything that's in the plan, we have the resources and the funding to support. So we feel comfortable and confident submitting it to Richmond at this point.
Mr. Jordan asked earlier about the Gifted Advisory Committee. Does this have their blessing in your opinion?
Yes, Ms. Banks shared it with them last week, and they 100% blessed it and endorsed it, which is why we are bringing it to the board tonight, because GAC has already endorsed it.
Thank you.
So are there some items in the plan, speaking to the board now, that there are specific concerns with in terms of approval? Yes.
I'm just gonna be very accurate.
Please.
I've been doing a lot of reading of the materials that we received, and I actually need a little bit more time to look at the gifted program. And I don't mind if we wanna bring it to a vote, for the 18th meeting, but I think that we just need to be able to give ourselves a little bit of time for discussion at that meeting if we have some discussion points to bring up, because I need some more time to review it.
I think we'll have discussion time when we come.
Right, right, and if you could.
And I'll feed questions,
right.
yes.
That's good.
But clearly, the GAC people have endorsed this.
At their last meeting, which was last week.
Okay.
And I know that
You wanna
Mr.
put this
Ambler.
based on the oath?
No, I just wanted to be clear that the people from GAC have said this is good to go.
Yes, and it isn't reflected in their minutes from their meeting last week.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, so we definitely want to get the questions submitted as soon as possible.
well, I just wanna be quick, cause I didn't know what the timing was, cause I was gonna ask, that's why I was looking at the calendar, whether or not we can just do it on the January 8th work session.
You can take action on it or more
Well,
discussion?
have the discussion on the January 8th work session, and then act on it on the January 22nd regular meeting. But if that's too far out, then if the process is to get these questions in, I just want to know what that is so I can make sure, because
Okay,
I'm like Dr. Gabriel, I didn't get a chance to fully.
understand. Dorian, any comments on it?
I was just gonna say, it'd be nice to have an approved plan on file. I mean, you all.
We've been waiting for a year.
It's 3-4 months, another month.
I mean, I'm asking, is it something, because.
I mean, the difference between December and January, I mean, that's what we're.
There's not a timeline factor, it was just a preference.
Okay. Right,
But I know based upon
all right,
the
so.
planning that you all had, if that works for me.
With that said, then it's my recommendation that we give the board the opportunity to review and ask questions, and we'll return with this as an item for the January work session. And be prepared to take action at the regular meeting unless there's very limited discussion at the work session. You still have the opportunity, because this is, consider this something that needs to be expedited. If you're comfortable, you can take action at the work session. I mean,
Right.
stop.
And I would still ask, since we have the information now, let's not wait. If there's some questions, we can get an answer, right away. Let's go ahead and submit them, the next few days or what have you, so that we can limit that discussion. If we can get questions answered prior to, and we won't, have to put unnecessary time in it on that day.
So the discussion is gonna be in January?
The work session
The
on
work
the 8th.
session, okay.
Yes.
With potentially other comments or.
But we definitely want to take action on it in January,
Thank you.
okay?
And should we be getting a letter from Tom Ambler about?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it's in
He's
like
preparing.
draft 3, it's coming.
Okay, Warren?
No, I was gonna say, if the answers were forthcoming and folks were more comfortable on the 18th, but we've already backed it up to the 8th, and the superintendent is comfortable with that, I'm cool too. But if the answers were forthcoming and all of a sudden people got more comfortable by the 18th, then we could vote. But I'm also comfortable with denying.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right?
Right, and then the last portion deals with the high school seal diploma request from Northview
Yes.
High School. And I'll ask Dr. Elsie Harold-Lands and a member of her team.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Houston, Dr. Robertson, members of the board, Dr. King. We'd like to share some information with you briefly about a request we received from Northview High School. And Dr. Dennis Moore is here with me to share some information about the diploma seal request, and also Mr. John Coleman, if there are any questions. And Ms. Stead, who is the program director of the Leadership Center for Science and Engineering at Norview High School, she was here, but she had to leave, so she was here to answer any questions as well. We'd also like to, if possible, to obtain a vote this afternoon related to this request. And so we're going to share some information with you generally, and I realize you have some materials that you received on board docs, but it's mainly about the specific request for a diploma seal for this particular program, and the board has the opportunity to approve this type of request, which is a little different from other diploma seal requests, but specific to a certain school. And so Dr. Moore is going to share some general information, and if you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer those for you.
Yeah, I only have about a minute or two's worth of information, so I should be able to get through this quickly. A request came to our office in September, basically from students. Students in this program had indicated that over in Virginia Beach, similar programs have a diploma seal that they thought was a special recognition that they would receive in recognition of their superior academic achievement. It was a diploma seal that was put on their diplomas. When they started asking about it, because this would be the first one done in Norfolk, we were like, how do we do this? We looked into the superintendent's memos, BDOE. They said it's a function of the school board, whether they approve or not. My first questions were, did the principal approve of it? Dr. Staley was on board with it. My second question was, is there funding for this if it is approved? It's only a couple $100. And they said that yes, a funding stream is available. Some basic information about the program. It's a specialty program offered by Norview High School. It was established in 2004. It's considered a school within a school. It's a very selective application process. They typically get about 150 applicants a year, and they have 50 spots designated per graduating year. It's basically an advanced studies diploma on steroids. I mean, they have it's a very substantive diploma. All the things that you would see in an advanced studies diploma, plus additional engineering courses. There's a leadership courses, and there's a summer foundations course in leadership. There's a 9th grade leadership course, an 11th grade leadership course. They complete a capstone project. They have to participate every year in a sport or academic activity, and they have to complete 200 hours of community service. So and the math and the science that's required, they have to go through like calculus level math, and they have to go through AP physics as well. So if you have completed all the requirements for this diploma, it's quite an accomplishment. And so basically, as coming from the students up through the school, they were asking if they could have a diploma seal. And in that packet is the LCSE emblem, and basically instead of it being that black and white emblem, it'd be a gold foil emblem that would just be affixed to the diploma. Any questions?
So how many other programs, or do we have programs, other programs with seals that actually go on the computer, on the diploma?
As of right now, today we were asking around, and none of the schools right now have a seal. This would be a new project.
So we don't have any other programs in our district where...
Not in our district, no.
Yeah.
What's that?
IB doesn't get a special
Ms.
seal?
Bradley would ask that question.
They get a certificate, but I don't think there's a special seal on the diploma.
And you don't get an advanced studies or honors distinction on your diploma?
They get the chords, and they get, I just started asking about this today. This was a thought I had last minute. But we started asking around, and we asked Mrs. Congdon? In the secondary office, and we asked, when you look at these diplomas, have you seen any special seals on them? And she indicated that she hadn't seen them.
Mine has a lot of seals
Go
on
ahead.
it.
Well, so currently, there's no board policy, obviously, on this. So it
No.
is-
And-
Exactly, right.
And the superintendent's memo indicates that it would be at the discretion of the board.
Board to
whether
do
they
that, yeah.
Approved it or they didn't approve it.
Right, go ahead.
This would be my recommendation, that as a board, we develop a policy with a defined criteria of what would constitute a seal on a diploma in Norfolk Public Schools. not to hold this process or this approval up, I'm not suggesting that today, because there are a lot of great programs that we have, and to your point, Dr. Gabriel, IB could come up, Maury High School could say, I have a great medical and health sciences, I have this, I have that, and so we could have a plethora. And do we have defined criteria? Right, well, exactly, all of them. So my recommendation is that we do create a policy with defined criteria so that it enables people to apply, not just one school, but many. And that it then allows our diplomas to look very still professional and in keeping with how we would like as a system.
So if we're going to, right now we don't have a policy, so if we're going to still consider approving this, just practically speaking, I would ask, chances are in the future that a student wouldn't graduate with having completed more than, say, one of these programs. It would be in one or the other. And I mean, I'm asking this question because we would certainly not be able to have a diploma full of seals. I mean,
Each high school has their
exactly.
own specialty, so, and it's possible that each high school would have one for IB, one for the medical sciences.
No, I get that, but I'm talking about
But
one
that you
student
couldn't have
typically
multiple
wouldn't-
as students
wouldn't
have a whole
completed more than one of these
diploma full of
programs.
seals, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna go back and pull my diploma, because
You got a seal.
I have a couple of seals on mine. I have a debate one, I have one for honors distinction, I have one for advanced studies, I have one for EVMS. So, and they're
There are
all
seals from the
gold
state.
foil
There
or
are.
different colored foil
Right.
seals on the diploma, so, I'll pull it.
There are seals that are given out by the state. I did see some information on that.
If we're following Courtney's recommendation, then can't we just figure out if there's some policy that maybe somebody else has that we can then
Check with
borrow?
Yeah.
We're gonna check on it.
But I would suggest that we not, we certainly want to be able to come back at least at the next meeting. I mean, they are certainly requesting kind of a sense of urgency, and I do respect that. So I would want us to be able to turn this around fairly quickly, and I know it wouldn't take long for us to check in with BSBA on this, so we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel if indeed there is already a policy in
And
existence.
just to make it clear, when Dr. Moore referenced the state superintendent's memo, the memo that he's referencing does refer to the state's practices for those particular seals that are awarded or approved by the state already. There's a separate section that refers to seals that, like this seal, that are specific to a school division that you cannot get anywhere else. And so that information is already outlined, and it does reference, though, that the school board for these types of requests can develop their own criteria to meet those particular needs or to address specific requests for the school-specific programs.
And so we recognize that we have that, that
Right.
authority, but I think we were looking at, are there some other practices in other
Right.
districts that could be useful for us in determining criteria and practice or regulation. So, so that we could deal with this item expeditiously, we could certainly have the information we need in a couple of days in terms of if we're going through VSBA, see if they have a policy. And then, I'm sorry? We have a little bit of time.
Yeah, that's right. What's the rushes?
Well, once you start kicking the can,
I'm not trying to keep.
Yeah, we'll be enabled. So I'm not trying to press us on a decision today, but I want to make sure we commit to an action, that we say, this is what we're going to do so that we can get back to the folks who need to know. And because the seal would have to be designed, I'm sure they get it ordered somewhere. And I don't know if we want to see the seal and approving it or.
The seal,
Oh,
it's
the seal
in,
is, sorry.
If I may, I think it's important to note that all of the schools currently have programs or recognitions in place.
Right.
This is just a different way of symbolically recognizing a high achievement. So, this is somewhat of a shift in recognizing this high achievement directly on the diploma versus other methods of recognition that currently exist.
And I don't think that any of us are against it, but once you start something,
Yeah.
You know, now you gotta be prepared as you move forward. So we wanna make sure it's a good practice and that we have a good approach to it, I think is what we're after. Certainly, we want to recognize and acknowledge our students, you know, wonderful academic accomplishments, especially in specialized programs like this. And so personally, I think it would be a good thing, but I think we want to do our due diligence to make sure that we have a good plan in place, because this will not be. And Dennis is holding this.
That's right here.
I know, he's holding it up like, please vote yes. So I think we could be prepared on the 8th to have at least the information we need if there's a policy that's already in existence, and we can check with our folks at VSBA. And if there's no policy in existence, is there a volunteer on the board that would at least take a shot at? Thank you so much. All right. So we have action on this, so we know what we're going to do. And we'll put it back on the agenda, Janelle, for the 8th work session, and hopefully by then we'll be ready to
Okay.
sign off on the seal.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. Okay, let's see. So it's 3 minutes to 4. There are a couple other items, and in a little bit, I would recommend we take a break before we get to the budget. But as I look through the other items we have before us, I would ask, are there questions or would anyone like a little discussion at all on the focus walk information? Going once? I'm sorry?
I said I know I had questions, but let me see. I do have questions.
You do? Okay. Dr. Stevens, who would answer those questions on the focus walk?
It would either be a member of the teaching and learning team or depending upon the question, maybe an executive director. So once we hear the question, we'll know who's going to answer.
All right, that's section 3 in our book. So I think the team is ready to receive your questions. Dr. Gabriel?
Okay. My first question is, do we have a standardized form for our focus walks? And is there a standardized form for a focus school, a priority school, and then a school that is not in either of those two categories?
We have, and I'm going to Dr. Spiegel before we chime in. We have an overall form, a district form that Dr. Spiegel. We have a form that we were given that was used for the district level focus walks. We also have a form that was vetted last year by principals, and we are using a different form at the middle school level.
And then at the elementary level?
At the elementary level, we use the district's form. At the elementary level, we use the form that was adopted by the district.
Okay. Is there anything in there that delineates specific look-fors for priority or focus schools? They just know what to look for.
It's clearly spelled out on the form that it's the same for all of our schools. We're looking for that high-quality, rigorous instruction. So the focus walk form is not different from building to building. We're looking for that high quality across the board.
Okay.
Brett, the middle school focus walks, basically the data show their growth areas, whole group instruction, 65% of the classrooms, 60% of the students are not fully engaged in 60% of the classrooms. Depth of knowledge, rigor not evident at levels requiring higher order thinking, 68% of the classrooms. What is the strategy for changing that?
Well, I did you put some strategies there. One of the things we're working on, and we do look at 7 areas in our focus walks. I selected glows and grows, of course the glows being those positive things and then areas of growth. We are working as a team to develop inter-rater reliability among the administrative teams. And what I'm speaking to them about is that if you have a teacher's classroom and they are coming out very high in all areas, but they have very low student achievement, then maybe we need some professional development in how we are evaluating what is going on in those rooms. So those are the areas. We're having a lot of conversations. Those 7 areas are the learning objectives, assessment in the classroom, classroom management, the depth of knowledge and rigor, instruction, content, and engagement. And I picked those areas that I felt were areas of strength and those areas that were weak from the overall data. There's tons of data. The good piece about this particular tool is that it is in Talent Ed. So I can open up Talent Ed, and Dr. Ronna Myers-Dobbs has been working with me to look at the data that has been put in by the schools. And it's also disaggregated.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just for, so on this, the presentation, is the part that was on the screen before, is that connected to the focus walk piece? We had the assessment data up front, and then you had the focus walk information. Are those 2 separate proposals, or they all go together? Presentations, rather.
Yeah, the separate piece, we were asked to come up with some CFA data just to give a snapshot of how we were looking at data. Now, I can speak to the middle school piece and the instructions that, that I have worked with the principals on. On the data for the middle school piece, for the CFA piece, and I can speak to it, it is not connected at this time to the Focus Walk data because this is a composite of all the schools, all 8 middle schools, whereas the CFA is related to one particular school that we were asked to choose a school. So I randomly selected a school and use the data from that particular school. I didn't put the school's name, but I can tell you the school that I used.
No, I'm just for what I'm supposed to be asking questions about. Just trying to make sure. Is it related or unrelated? Is it?
I think it's
Okay.
Okay, let me add some clarity in reference to CFAs, since we're kind of changing the mode of presenting here to move forward.
Okay.
So that's adding a little bit to, I guess, some of the bit of confusion. But the CFA piece relates to elementary level, which would be both Dr. Malisi and Dr. Williford. And so what they provided should have been a snapshot of the process that we use and endorse to analyze the common formative assessments that are done monthly to determine each month how children are doing and how they're mastering standards, so that we can ensure that safety nets are aligned with what the CFAs are telling us, in addition to what those focus walks tell us about the information. And if you recall, you all in previous meetings, you talked a bit about the CFAs in terms of wanting to know, we're having these each month. What is it telling us? Are we on target? Are we lagging behind? Are we exceeding? And that piece was provided so that they could tell you the process that is being utilized to determine whether we're on target, lagging, or exceeding. And if we are lagging, here's what's being done. That's what that is about.
So my question to the chair is, that's important stuff to me. So in terms of timing, and you were asking us about the questions about the focus wall.
Right.
Does that mean then right now we aren't going to have time to hear that piece? And if so, will we hear it sometime soon?
It's 4:05, and now I yield to the desires of the board, the will of the board. It's 4:05. I truly believe at 4:45 we need to go to budget and give ourselves at least 45 minutes to hammer out our budget priorities. I think we have to do that today. And so that gives us, right now, 40 minutes for what, to use how the board wishes, given the remaining amount of material we may want to hear about, which I think need to include a 10-minute break, which would give us 30 minutes if we agree on the break. So however we want to use this 30 minutes, given the material that we have before us, I want to hear back from you, and then we can say to the administration, this is where we want to focus our next 30 minutes on.
Earlier, you
Yes.
had said that you were hoping to allocate an hour, and I would hesitate to go to as few as 30 minutes.
45 is what I'm
Yeah.
suggesting.
Anyway, I would rather you shoot for more time than less on the budget, because I think it's going to be that critical in the time period that elapsed between now and our next get-together for the superintendent to gather information. So I would rather even give more time to that and prioritize the other things within a smaller bit of time.
Okay.
And I would agree with that only because I didn't realize that that data was in front of this presentation because it wasn't in the paper. It must be in the board docs.
Yeah, and I didn't get
So
into
I
that.
just am now
What
looking
are
over
you
the shoulder.
speaking of, the focus walks?
You're not even seeing that up there. No, it's data that's in, before that, in the same presentation. That's
Oh, the
what-
school leadership report, you mean?
No.
The CFA.
Oh, the CFA report, I see what you're saying. You're looking at it on board
I
now.
thought you all had that
No.
in paper. I'm looking at it on board.
Oh,
docs.
no.
So,
I'm
because we
going-
all haven't had the chance to see it,
Yeah.
I think we should probably not talk about it today per se, until we have full ability to do that. And then I think, Dr. King, you mentioned that's what we're gonna talk about January 8th as well, the benchmark assessments, which would include
Benchmark
the CFAs.
assessments, but if we do that, then it will be benchmarking assessments in addition to CFAs.
Right.
Okay, so what I'm asking for now is what do we want to focus on, and I'm okay, I just want the will of the board right now for the next 20 minutes or so before we take a quick stretch break and get into the budget. So, Mr. Joy?
Can I punt to the superintendent? Because, I've looked at the budget stuff, and I think the budget information is, the priorities are awfully important.
Right.
But, we have been asking, where are we academically? If this is going to help us get a picture of where we are academically, I think that's important. But it's hard for me to, you have to tell me how important this is to giving us.
It's extremely important.
Okay.
It's extremely important. I would ask my group here, can you do that very quickly? And to the point to say, to hit the items that we know we need to hit. And then move from there. Because, and the other piece that I think as we make this shift that we all have to understand, I heard you say that you didn't see this prior to. This is an example of some of those things that when you do work sessions, the first time you see it may be at the work session. And so that's why you have discussion at the work session. So you don't put it off because you didn't have it 3 days before. When you receive it, you talk about it and ask those questions at that point. And then beyond that point, you continue those questions. So, but for the most part, the leading items you get prior to. There will very rarely be items that you don't see for the first time at a work session. But I just think that there's a period of adjustment for that. And we've not done this before, so.
And so, whichever part of this report we're going to receive now, I think one of the things we're going to have to talk about as a board, because right now we have, we had HR information we received, we have communications information that we received. Obviously, we won't be able to deal with all of this, so we're going to have to talk about as we move forward with our board governance training, how we manage the time, because I didn't want to interrupt discussion early on, because I thought it was a good discussion. So we're going to have to talk about how we manage our time, and then how we make decisions as we get to the end of the meeting. But I definitely think we got to do those budget priorities today, or it's going to really set us back in terms of not only our internal work, but as we communicate as well with the city in terms of the kind of support we may be asking for budget-wise. So I think that's critical. And as you even alluded to earlier, Mr. Jordan, when we talk about the support of the school board, the budget piece is a big part of what we have, quote-unquote, control over, so to speak. If we get this piece that they're going to provide now, that'll be it. as Mama would say, to budget time. To do the budget piece. So,
Board docs.
It's school leadership,
It's at the top of the.
focus walk data.
okay. All right, you all are on, yes.
Okay, Dr. Houston, Dr. Robinson, Dr. King, members of the board, we will be very brief. We will be very brief, but we did want to take this opportunity to clarify some information that was really discussed earlier about our elementary, middle, and high school common formative assessments. The information that you have before you is an example of data from random schools in terms of the common formative assessments in math. And you can see where we have outlined where in September a district benchmark assessment was given. In October, our schools gave CFAs, and then in November, we had our Q1 DBAs, and coming up in December will be another round of CFAs. And so I think what's best to glean from this random schools we've identified, some are we have priority schools, we have focus schools, and some high-flying schools. But in terms of math, you may remember we started out with in 0% proficiency at the elementary level, and that led our schools to developing their interventions, and you can see results from the interventions in the October CFA from random schools. We know that we have some schools that gave CFAs that were not in SchoolNet, and so you see that as well. So everything that was discussed earlier, we have captured, and then we have preliminary data from the November DBA, and what that says to us in terms of analysis and what we've been discussing with our principals, it says two things. You've got improvement from a district level. We see growth in learning with our students. That's what we want to see. And we also see some gaps between the CFA that was given and the DBA that was given in terms of math. And so that leads to implications for training so that we can close the gap between the DBA and the CFA. So that's what we're doing with that data in terms of math. Mm-hmm.
The bottom, A, B, C, D, E, F, they're just random
schools.
Elementary schools. And then 0 to 90 is the grading scale.
Percent proficient.
Percent proficient. And we don't you have a color code up there for September, but that's just not shown on the slide.
Well, in those schools in September on the DBA that was given, it was 0% proficient.
It was 0.
Yes.
Okay.
And yes.
All right.
And that was a pre-assessment. And so again, that shows growth. On one end, we created this graph here to show student growth, yes, and also to show again an analysis of work to do in terms of what the training implications for our schools, because the CFA and the DBA are different, but we are giving, again, a DBA was given in September, a CFA was given in October, the Q1 DBA was given in November, and from this November data, our schools would develop CFAs to be given in December. And then we'll go on break and come back in January, and another CFA will be given. So we'll have data throughout. And again, this just supports the process that was discussed earlier and the work that's going on in our schools. And so we can see growth, again, with student learning, but we also have implications for training, looking at the gaps there, because we want to make sure that our CFAs that are given at the school level are as rigorous, if not more, as the district assessment as well.
Yes.
There are different processes in development. The district assessments comes from our coordinators and Lisa Corbin's shop in terms of development of those DBAs. Her coordinators they train our specialists. In most schools, they're training the specialists to develop the CFAs, which are given at the school level. While they're also training those, the specialists are creating at the school level, they're also training, giving professional development to teachers so that the weekly assessments that are going on are rigorous as well.
I think what might be helpful for this slide, and when we get future information, is the CFAs are given we're theoretically want to do it every 4 weeks. And the CFAs are on SOL topics that the students have to cover. Your benchmark assessments are given, let's say we're doing 4. We're doing the pre-test, the one in November, October, the one in February, the one in May. So what would be what we should see as a correlation is the CFAs given between the pre-test and the October benchmark should be right on par. They should be equal. If the CFAs, if I'm saying this correctly, if our CFAs are just as rigorous as the benchmarks, they should correlate. The two should correlate together. So they should be, you should see the same. The yellow line and the red line should be equal.
I would say that would be ideal, but we have to take into consideration that the DBAs cover and assess more standards than a CFA would.
But if you cover it, if you compare your CFAs just for that benchmark period, they should theoretically they should be about the same, right?
Only if you master it.
Because that's saying you mastered it.
I would say no to that. I think that, again, the DBAs, you're covering different standards. There are some standards that'll be, for example, when the pretest was given in September, and we created, from that information, you had the DBA, and that told us where students were, and caseloads were created with those students. And then in October, the schools, and different schools created their CFAs according to the standards that they may be weak in or strong in, and that varied by schools. So there isn't, each school is responsible for developing their own CFAs, and so that may look different. What Tidewater and PB Young assess may be different from what Larchmont is assessing.
But if you compare data at Tidewater Park, if you look just at Tidewater Park, their CFAs should be in alignment with the benchmark assessments, and if they're not, that's when you have to go back in and say, what's going on with your CFAs?
And that's the discussion that we're having. Yes, okay. I agree with you there. That's part of the work that we're doing. And again, that's why I say on both ends, you see, this gives us student achievement, but it also tells us gaps in where we are at each school. And yes, that's exactly correct.
Very brief comment to your point. The DBA too, we should remember that the DBA compared to the CFA really measures in some form a longer term retention of knowledge too, because it's over a longer period of time. Whereas the CFA is done basically monthly, and it's pretty warm, real-time information that the children will have received. And then when you do your DBA, it's over a longer period of time, usually. I guess you could call it quarterly, a quarter's worth of information, and then maybe some alluding to what's coming as well. So sometimes you can anticipate that result may be a little weaker than a CFA, but we would like to see it move closer to where the CFA is.
And I can see it being weaker.
Right.
I can certainly see it being weaker as almost like a final exam. You're tested on everything that you've learned versus that. So I could definitely see it being a little bit lower, but huge gaps.
Yeah.
Obviously, eventually we shouldn't be seeing that.
So we're going to have to take a TV time out because they change the tapes. So this was the perfect time.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Perfect time for us to take a quick break,
Yeah.
and then we'll finish up with you, and then move on to the budget. We do need to break for the, thank you.